Every second Wednesday of the month, old washed up gods meet in a pub. A Fringly Reddit story. The happy hour sign was slowly flashing in the window, but the dark gloom inside seemed to make a cruel mockery of the sentiment. I held the door open for a moment, and the sunlight spilled across the stained floor until a voice further and growled in a soft warning. Either shut it, fuck off, or both. I hesitated for just a moment and then stepped inside and let the door swing shut behind me. My eyes slowly adjusted to the gloom, and the bar seemed to emerge from the shadows, a long mahogany strip which lined the left-hand wall, separating dusty bottles from dusty patrons. Behind the bar, the owner of the voice that had greeted me was wiping a glass with a rag and watching me with his sole remaining eye. His other eye was a milky mass which was half closed, giving him a permanent squint that added to his evaluating stare. I looked from him to the rest of the room where three small round tables sat with low stool around them. Across two there were figures slumped, heads on arms, sleeping or dead, both seemed possible. Apart from the barman, the only conscious person in the bar was sitting at a bar stool, slowly swirling something around in a glass. The 10 or so seconds I had been standing seemed to have shed me to the limits of the barman's tolerance, and he leaned forward on the bar, speaking in a low tone. You drinking or standing? There's a charge for both. Without any conscious input from my brain, my feet decided that it was time to move forward, and I found myself in front of the bar and closer to the barman, who was still glaring at me with naked hostility. I scanned across the bottle behind the bar, but none were brands I recognized and most were in languages I had no idea how to read. What beer do you have? The barman shook his head, seemingly in disgust at my choice, and without taking his eye off me, he reached under the bar and fished out a bottle that he opened in one motion and slammed down in front of me. The label was incomprehensible, but a hoppy smell was rising from it, and so I carefully took a swig and found a fresh and surprisingly mild beer. We don't do credit or tabs. The eye hadn't moved. I pulled a coin from my pocket and spun it onto the countertop and let it rotate to a standstill. At last, the barman broke his gaze and glanced down, then did a double take and looked more closely. The coin was solid gold and good quality, and he picked it up with care and raised it to his mouth where he bit it. The coin bruised a little and his eyebrows raised before he remembered himself and lowered them into a scowl. He straightened up and took one last look at my face before turning away and shuffling to his register, where he deposited the coin and then moved to the other side of the bar. He'd not bother me again for payment for a long while I guessed. The other figure at the bar had looked up at the moment the barman fell silent, and one evaluating gaze was swapped for another. At least he didn't seem hostile, which was somewhat of a relief. He was dressed in a suit that had seen better days and a shirt that had perhaps once been white, but a mixture of the bar's lighting and a good deal of use had left it a soft brown. Overall, the general impression was that of a bank manager who had fallen on hard times. He smiled and it crinkled his face, which was youthful but carried experience in its lines. Don't mind Merle. He doesn't like new folk around here, but he serves the best drinks. I took a swig of my beer, surprised again at its taste. Doesn't seem like much of a business model. The stranger laughed, and I chuckled along too. At last he held out a hand. Bez Wuriel of the Upper Land people, but people call me Bez. I took his hand and shook it. Nice to meet you, Bez. I guess you can call me Arthalnois, though. You know what, I guess it's Artie these days. Bez nodded and turned back to his drink. So I was told there was a support group that met here for beings like me, former gods. Bez smiled again and swigged back his drink, then nodded to Merle, who walked over, filled his glass from a bottle, and then retreated. Yeah, that's us. He gestured over his shoulder to the slumped forms, then raised his glass, gesturing towards Merle. We're the leftovers. I leaned back to see the slumped forms. So, you guys were all gods? His glass raised and fell again before Bez answered. Yup. Technically, Jorel still is. He wafted his hand towards the nearer slumped figure, but he's only had 2 followers for about 6 generations. They keep convincing one of their kids to follow him, and he petered out and wafted his hand. He didn't need to explain. I knew what it was like to get to the last few followers and to feel the pain as the faith slipped away. What had once been a torrent of power and belief became a trickle, and when it finally stopped, the silence was almost a blessing. For me, once it was over, I had spent a long time wandering the world, trying to find out what had gone wrong and why my people had abandoned me. With the power gone, so was the omniscience, and so I had to work these things out, but it all seemed so unclear. It had been a water spirit that had told me of this place, a bar where old gods could find solace with others who had similarly lost their followers and become whatever we were now. I swigged at my beer again. So, what do you do too? Support each other. Bez smiled into his drink and knocked it back again. Pretty much this. I drained the last of my beer and looked down the bar. I guess another one of these then, please. Merle. He walked over and pulled another beer out from under the bar, but this time after he twisted the cap free, he wiped off the top on his apron. I looked at the various stains and marks that were down his front and wished a little that he hadn't, but it seemed to be a sign of acceptance, and so I took the beer. I looked around the room again, and my eyes lit upon a board at the back. You want to play darts? Baz looked up. You any good? I'm not going easy on you if not. I shrugged. I guess I've got eternity to learn.